Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for attending the July 14th meeting of the RCPA Climate Action Advisory Committee. I think we will get started with introductions, and I'm just going to go by jurisdiction. So regarding, we'll bounce back and forth to the screen as necessary. I don't see anyone from Cloverdale today. And Katani, Healdsburg is not. There we go. Tyra, yes. And Tyra is, for the record, participating under AB 2449, the Just Cause. If you guys have any questions about that, you could do it twice a year. Let me know. So, you want to introduce yourself, Tyra?
Hi, yeah, I'm from, my name is Ty Benoit and I'm from Healdsburg.
Excellent. Thank you. And Petaluma?
I'll start. Pete Gang, Petaluma.
And I'm Beverly Shore, Petaluma, joining you via Zoom today.
And let's see.
Shirley Johnson, Roner Park. You guys.
Hi, Julie Roy, Park as well.
Santa Rosa.
I'm Kevin Conway, representing Santa Rosa.
And
Transportation Land Use Coalition.
Sebastopol and Sonoma.
David Lehman.
Town of Windsor
Christopher Peck, Town of Windsor.
and County of Sonoma, Corsi's District.
Tom Conlon, Corsi's District.
And Rapids District, I believe Jake is unable to make it today. And District 5. I don't see anyone, so that is not a quorum, correct, Drew? We are slightly short. I do have a little something I'll mention during announcements about working towards getting a quorum, but for now we will move on to public comment on items not on the agenda. Do we have any pre-submitted comments? Anyone?
No pre-submitted comments were received.
All right. So in that case, item 3, this will continue as a committee of the whole. And so there will not be action on the notes at this point. And so I believe we'll move right to item number 4.
Yeah, actually, maybe I'll go sit over there just so I can see more people. If I can see the whole room.
Come on down.
All right, so we wanted to give everyone an update on the climate protection initiative and more specifically the results from the climate poll that RCPA engaged EMC research to conduct. So as you may recall, we did a lot of work in the spring with 3 program committees to gather inputs and ideas for projects that could be considered as part of an expenditure plan for a potential tax measure, sales tax, parcel tax measure in the fall of 2024. And before we went too much further with those project lists, we wanted to get a scientifically valid poll of the community to really understand the community's interest and appetite for some type of climate measure in 2024. So wanted to share, and so we've shared the results, or EMC actually did the presentation to our board on Monday of this week. So I'd like to walk through that presentation. I am not an expert on surveys, so if there are questions that you all have that I'm not able to answer, I can follow up with EMC and get back to you with a response. But did want to walk through the results with you. And so let me see. First, I'm going to turn this on. Oh, I got it.
I clicked at the same time.
Oh, you clicked. Okay. You want me to try it?
There we go.
All right. So first, just a little bit of background on the survey methodology. It was a survey of likely November 2024 voters. So the polling firm has access to lists of likely voters. Was done in a mixed mode, so both telephone and online survey. The time frame it was conducted was June 15th to the 22nd. The firm did a total of 800 interviews and split those into 2 samples of 400 each, because our board wanted to test to see if there were any differences in support between doing a parcel tax versus a sales tax. So that's why we did the 2 samples. Was done in both English and Spanish. And there is data from past surveys, depending on the question that was asked, that the polling firm can show, kind of track over time. And so you'll see in some of the slides, we have results from previous years. All right, so in terms of key findings, one of the questions that is usually asked in these polls is, how do voters in general feel about how things are going in Sonoma County, the direction? And so overall, about half of the voters are optimistic about the direction of Sonoma County. The 2 top issues that came up in this poll, and I think in other recent polls, were homelessness and affordable housing. That's kind of top of mind for voters. Climate change is also among the issues that rate highly as a top problem, as well as wildfires. So voters do see those as very serious issues. The climate resilience measure itself, and you'll see a little bit later the ballot question that we posed to the folks who were taking the survey, is supported by a slight majority, but substantially less than the 2/3 supermajority required for passage. So if this were to go on the ballot tomorrow, there would not be enough support to actually pass the measure. The polling firm found that support is slightly higher for a sales tax than a parcel tax, but not a huge difference. And then also, as they went through the survey, they presented the people taking the survey with arguments both in favor of and in opposition to the measure, and found that information about the benefits of the measure didn't significantly increase support for the measure. So, and I'll show you a list of kind of what some of those arguments were. So here's a view of the question about, is Sonoma County on the right track or the wrong track? You can see how the voter sentiment varies over time. We're actually at kind of an uptick in people feeling positive and feeling like we're going in the right direction. And then this question was an open-ended question. So the respondents were asked to basically share what they think is the most important problem facing Sonoma County today. And this is one that we do have data over time. So you can see here, homelessness and affordable housing, ranked at the top in 2023. Homelessness has really been a high concern over a number of years. And you can see kind of down there in the middle there, climate change in the environment was mentioned at about 7%, and then all the way down to growth, development, and overpopulation. So this is kind of what people said initially was their top concern. And we'll get you all a copy of this as well, so you don't have to take notes and you can reference it. And so then this question gave a list of issues and asked the respondents to share whether they felt it was a very serious problem, a somewhat serious problem, a not too serious problem, or not at all serious problem. And again, you can see for those items that have been asked over time, you can see the trend. And this shows in terms of the list that was presented in this survey, homelessness came out on top again, wildfires second. But interestingly, the concern about wildfires has dropped a bit from 2021 to 2023. And then lack of available housing. And I'm not sure why the asterisk is next to that one. So if you're curious about that, I'll have to ask the polling firm. But that went up slightly from 2021 to 2023. And then global warming or climate change dropped a bit between 2021 and 2023. So again, you can kind of see how people are feeling about the various issues that are facing Sonoma County and the region at large. So then this slide, we asked a question to get a sense for how voters felt about our ability to have an impact locally. And from this, you can see the statement was, changes in Sonoma County can't do anything to affect climate change. And overall, 62% disagreed with that statement. 36% were strongly in disagreement, and somewhat disagree was 26%. So, overall voters do feel like there is, action that we can take to affect climate change. And then those who agreed with the statement were 38% in total. And then on the right-hand side, you can see in much smaller print, probably hard to read, just the differences across the different demographic groups and geographic locations. So they were able to split the data by different supervisor districts, also by voter registration and gender and age, college educated, non-college educated. So you can see some of that demographic data as well. And then this is an important one in terms of tax hesitancy. So how people are feeling about their willingness to tax themselves for any kind of measure, but in this case, the climate measure. So the question was, I will vote no on any tax increase, no matter what it is for. And so we had 61% total who disagreed with that statement. So that's a good sign. 39% agreeing with that statement. And again, you can see, and we'll provide these slides to you. You can see how that varies in the different slices of voters. So then lastly, this last one kind of shows you how that's changed over time. And this is one that we definitely, our board definitely is looking at, is that over time between 2019 and 2023, there has been an increase in people who are less likely to support taxes for, whatever the tax measure is. So there's more opposition to taxing ourselves for local investments. So now going into the measure itself. So this shows you the ballot question, which, we had to put together a draft ballot question for the purpose of the survey, just to do the test and see how people would support it. And so this is where you can see that for both the parcel tax and the sales tax, support is below the 2/3 majority that would be needed to pass the climate measure, and that it's not that different between the parcel tax and the sales tax. So I'll just pause a minute so you can read through that ballot statement. We really tried to make it all encompassing. Again, based on the feedback from our various program committees in terms of the items that kind of stood out for them, or the areas that we would want to invest in. And we did put an end date on it. So we in this ballot question said that it would be a sales tax or a parcel tax for 10 years and would also have oversight and audits. So that's the kind of high level view. And then we have a very busy slide, again, which I won't go through in detail, that shows that breakout in the different categories. And the one thing to call out here is that unlike other measures, so like I went back and looked at the polling that was done for our transportation sales tax measure, the partisan nature of this issue really stands out here. You can see that only 8% of Republican registered voters said they would vote to approve this. And 72% of Democratic voters said, or Democrat voters said that they would approve it. So, and when I looked at the transportation sales tax measure, it was much closer to 50-50. We didn't see that strong breakdown. So, Tom, did you have a question or?
I have a lot of questions.
No. Wait till the end. All right. All right. So I won't dwell too much on this slide. And then here, so we had the ballot question in total that folks were asked to respond to, and then went through each of the components of the measure to try and get an understanding of, are there certain pieces of this that voters respond to more favorably than others? And you can see that, yes, that is the case. Elements such as ensuring a reliable water supply, protecting wildlife, forests, nature areas, and agriculture, preventing and reducing the impacts of drought, wildfire, floods, and heat waves, and improving water and air quality, all kind of, received a fair amount of support. And then you can see how that support declines as we go through the different items, with public transportation kind of following it at the bottom in terms of voters viewing as important or extremely important.
Was wildfire in that question?
Yeah, under prevent and reduce the impacts of drought, wildfire, floods, and heat waves.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah, we did have it in there. And then here is where the polling firm, as they were in both on the online and the phone interviews, gave a number of arguments in favor or reason, benefits of the measure. And you can see that the most convincing of these was the one about the funds would be used locally and there would be oversight and accountability and to make sure those funds were spent as the voters specified that they be spent. And then the other arguments in favor or benefits that we stated were not as convincing. So we talked about, ensuring a good water supply, developing our workforce, addressing the impacts of climate change, and providing more transportation options. Got some support, but we're not, overwhelmingly supported. And then a couple additional items. So we asked, and there were a couple of questions that had to be split into two for whether it was a sales tax or a parcel tax. So that's why you see those first two broken out. So looking at the, value of this measure and folks, again, willingness to pay for the measure, feeling like it's worth the tax, those weren't all that convincing in terms of, it's a small price to pay for these benefits that we are putting forward. The equity benefit was not, rated as strongly. And then the idea that we're, leading the way, this is the first measure of its kind in California, was also not that convincing to folks. And then we had a couple of opposition messages, and they were, convincing to folks to varying degrees. So it's yet another tax measure on top of what we already pay. And we know that we are close to the limit for our sales tax, depending on what jurisdiction you live in. You're paying 9 to 10% tax currently. And with this measure, that of course would go higher. The argument about the taxes being regressive seemed to resonate strongly with people in terms of being convincing. And then the arguments about, we're already doing a lot to address climate change. We're green, we're sustainable. That was not as convincing to folks. And we also asked a question about agriculture there at the bottom. So then I'll show you on this slide kind of how those arguments, benefits and then arguments in opposition impacted how people vote, rated the measure. So they were presented the ballot question, asked whether they'd support it or not. Then they heard these arguments in favor and against, and they were asked again, do you support this or not? And so you can see for the parcel tax, those in support went up slightly after they received the benefits and then went back down again. And then for the sales tax, didn't see quite as much of a change in terms of the benefit and the opposition statement. So, that would tell us if we were going to move forward with, a measure, we'd have to come up with some more compelling benefit statements, to really convince voters that this is something we should be doing or they want to support. So in terms of conclusions, definitely saw in the results that voters care about climate change and wildfire. They understand the seriousness of those issues. And that, the ways that we could mitigate those are important to people, but there's a disconnect between caring about these issues, knowing that they're serious, and being willing to support a new tax just to address them. And so from the polling firm's perspective, a new tax requiring a supermajority support does not appear viable. So that's kind of the poll in itself, and I'll pause there and see what questions you all have before we talk about next steps. So maybe look in the room first, and then Drew, maybe you can help me if there's anybody on Zoom.
My question is, how would all this change after this coming weekend?
The heat, yeah,
Timing.
I'm sorry, Drew, what's that?
I'm gonna take the chair down.
The chair down?
The share.
The share, yes, thank you, Drew, sorry.
Great, that's a lot of data, so thank you for
Yeah.
going through it so well. I'm curious, I have some methodology questions, but first of all, you said there was both Spanish and English. What fraction of the response was Spanish speaking?
I don't have that data with me, but I'm pretty sure it's in the final report, so I can get, that.
It'd be kind of interesting to see some of these results broken out by that.
Yeah.
As a crosstab. Just to get a sense, especially as we're looking into equity outreach, we may find that there are some interesting differences in our populations on some of these points. I thought the by party affiliation difference was dramatic and quite a surprise. Let's see. In terms of looking for measure, now I'm jumping into interpretations.
Yeah.
Homelessness and affordability of housing are top of mind issues right now. We did none of our benefits messages, I think, really attached this to that. And I don't expect that that's going to disappear as a concern of Sonoma County voters. So we may want to focus on trying to identify benefits of housing solutions, and of course the transit housing linkage that Steve and I are always talking about. And then I don't know, that's probably enough for now. I also think the overall trend, what we're really seeing is the overall trend in drop of support for taxation in general. I think I wrote down 69 dropping to 63, now dropping to 61%, which is a pretty big slide and very different from the conditions that we were in when the transportation tax measure was put out to voters, which was itself just a squeaker. Certainly around the board table, it was a squeaker, but then later in the population, I think what was the margin on that vote?
Don't remember.
67,
It was, I think it was
67
a
and a half.
comfortable, yeah.
It wasn't 69 though, it was more like
Yeah.
67 and a half, 68. So I recall. The squeaker is what I said, yeah. So fascinating stuff. And I would look forward to digging into some of these results to understand them better. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions in the room? Yeah.
I think it's easy to understand that people don't want to pay more taxes. But there are alternatives, and I think the biggest one is the bipartisan infrastructure law. There's $1.2 trillion available for communities to access that money for projects like that we're talking about. So I just hope that there are parts of the staff for the RCPA, as well as different cities that are really digging into this and beginning to draft grants and look at how to access that money, because it's huge.
Yeah, and so maybe just a couple comments on that. RCPA, we would love to have a grant writer on staff to do just as you're saying, and we don't currently, and a measure like this could help bolster our capacity to do that. And I think the situation is similar in at least some of our jurisdictions. And then there's also the need, and at least in some of these grants and offerings, to be able to do a local match. And so again, having a local revenue measure could provide the funding for that.
Many
match.
don't.
So,
Many don't require it.
So. Great. Any other, David?
Yeah, just to follow up on what Tom was asking about the methodology. Was there any information gathered on likely voters? And has that made a difference in the past in polling on these, before a measure and in the event?
Yeah. So when you say information gathered on likely voters,
As part of the polling, it was 800.
it was actually a
Citizens.
sample of likely voters.
Oh, it was,
And so
okay,
one of the
all right.
questions
I
that was
missed
asked that wasn't in the presentation, but asked people, did you vote in the last election?
Okay.
And if somebody said, I think it was over like the last 3 cycles, if they said they didn't vote, then they were excluded from, they didn't ask them any more questions.
Got it.
So
Okay.
yeah.
And then to follow up on what Kevin said, in a maybe a slightly different way, a lot of the projects that were, or the types of issues that were identified have a strong tie to infrastructure too. And perhaps recasting this more along those lines would have some benefit in terms of increasing support. Because I think people, especially maybe among Republicans, or those who are, naturally not disposed to supporting a tax increase.
Are you thinking like investments in local renewable energy supply?
All of the transportation stuff is certainly characterizable as infrastructure. A lot of the resilience measures should be characterized that way. And I mean, if you look through that, it would be easy to represent those as infrastructure related. Or
I could just follow, so your suggestion there is not to present this as climate benefits, but infrastructure investments. Or,
well, that would be another end method, let's put it that way. I mean, it could be some combination of those things, you know.
just wanted to make sure I was hearing what you said.
Yeah.
I have a question. Connie.
Yeah.
I know these polls are, these professionals that do these polling, they're pretty expensive, so. If we were to do another poll, how much would that add on to the cost?
So this one, we received funding through the county's, there's a name for their fund, Climate Resilience Fund. So the county actually funded the poll and the total cost was about $50,000. So if, to do another poll would probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of that.
And if we decide not to, what's our game plan to do another one in 2 years or what? Put out another measure in 2 years?
I'm not sure if we would move forward with that. I mean, that's what our board is really considering at this point. And so definitely no plans to do another poll at this point in time. If we were going ahead with a measure in 2024, then there would most likely be another poll done closer to the election, just to get a kind of more real-time sense of what voters were thinking. But and also maybe once we get through this round of questions, I can share a little bit about our next steps. So Pete, you had a question, and Steve. And then I'm going to go to the Zoom because they.
I also just wanted to echo what Tom caught, that I remember at an earlier meeting, Chris Rogers had said that there are something like 27% of voters who will vote against any measure. And it's just interesting to see how that number has crept up or has shot up dramatically. I'm not surprised that the poll shows that there's not enough appetite to do a sales tax increase. In a way, to me, the idea of seeking more money to address climate crisis strikes me as being a little bit odd, because we're already spending vast sums of money on everything that we're doing, which is contributing to the problem that we're trying to solve. So in a way, logically, I would think, could we not just put more scrutiny on the vast sums of money that we're spending to rather than spending more?
Stop subsidizing climate deterioration.
Yes, stop going in the wrong direction.
Stop digging the hole deeper.
Yes, stop digging.
Yeah. Following on that, I think the fundamental problem is that we're dealing with something that is not tangible.
Yeah.
The temperature is there, but a highway, you can see what you're going to get. A change in climate is something that happens worldwide. The fact that we are the cutting edge on this, and that we're the first one in the state to actually set this up, and we can't point to look, temperatures are going down as a result of what we've done, and if we could point to that, everybody would say, okay, you're done. So we're in a very difficult spot for asking voters to put money into what we want to do. The Air Resources Board understands how important this is. MTC may understand. The state legislature may understand, and maybe that's where we need to go to get funded.
All right, I'm going to turn to our Zoom folks, and Ty, you have a question? And then
a question and a comment. This is my second go around, because I did go to the RCPA meeting on Monday and listen to this, and it seems obvious to a lot of us that more education is needed, and also the connections that exist between homelessness, affordable housing, and climate. I mean, they're all interconnected, and I have a lot of illustrations about that. But I know that at the regular RCPA meeting, the group talked about going back to the idea of a citizen-led initiative, where you only need 51% to pass. And I know we're concerned about the other initiative that's on the ballot for November. So my question is, can't we anticipate that and go for the primary as opposed to the November election? That would be my question. And go for the citizen-led before that other measure passes. So that's my question.
Yeah, so that's certainly something that, that's not something that our CPA would be able to put forward ourselves, but certainly if there were a group of citizens that wanted to do that, I think timing wise, March is not realistic, just in terms of the work that needs to be done to get the signatures, to get it on the ballot, in time for that March deadline. And I know there are a couple of other efforts that are underway to gather signatures for the Our Kids, Our Future and the wildfire measure. So they're already out there gathering signatures, and I think they're going for the March ballot. But I don't, I don't want to say it's impossible, but I think timing wise, it would be a stretch to get it on the March ballot, is my understanding.
But would it be retroactive if then the ballot in November passes that? So if Our Children, Our Future is successful in March, would that then be discounted by the passage of the other?
Yeah, I don't believe so, but that is a question that's been asked. And I have not studied that ballot measure that's going on in November to know. Just for folks who haven't, are not aware of it, there's a measure that's qualified for the ballot in November 2024 that would basically require any tax measure. It would remove the ability to do a citizen-led initiative to pass a tax with a simple majority, and would require those to have a 2/3 majority. And so the question is, if something is approved, say in March, before then, does this reach back retroactively? And I think there's a belief that that's not the case, but I don't know that it's been ruled out one way or the other.
There is a sentence in there that tries to make a retroactive.
So whether that's legal, but would stand up and is the question. Beverly.
Yes, I have actually two observations. The first is I was very active for the Measure M for parks, and they asked, we went round and round, but they asked for just 1/8 of a cent as opposed to 1/4, and it still represents millions of dollars. But psychologically, I think there's so much resistance for more taxation that I think psychologically 1/8 of a cent might be more saleable. But my other observation is that the language doesn't really match the resistance to paying more sales tax, whether it's 1/8 or 1/4, and that the concerns of the voters really aren't being addressed in the ask. So if the language could be changed and maybe the amount reduced, possibly this could fly. But I'm personally of the frame of mind that people it's just not a good time to be requesting more money, and it is a really good time for us as a group to find, grant writers or other ways to tap into what all of us think is a lot of available money for climate issues. So that's my observation.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, I'll just.
Yeah,
talk about the next steps.
yeah, it's interesting because there's only really a couple % of people that are convincible or persuadable in this, right? There's the 30, you said 31, and that I couldn't see it too well. The 31 that were like, no, nothing, doesn't matter what you say or ask or rework or reduce, I'm just not doing it. So you only have then what? From 62-ish to 60, you only have a small margin of people that could be possibly talked into it somehow. And so that, to me, that suggests like, that's a very hard ask, and that's a steep climb, but then also like knowing that group of folks, we could rework, but like knowing what those folks are thinking about, that seems like that would be to me, the target place to go next is like, what are those possibly persuadable folks actually really what would move the needle for them? So that's a much more targeted thing. But that's my only observation. I don't know how we do that.
Right, so let me just wrap up with a couple of kind of next steps. And Beverly, did you have another question before you do that? No. Okay. So the polling firm presented the results on Monday, and our board, had some discussion about them. And in terms of next steps, so the board asked staff to kind of take a look at, there was interest from the board in understanding what are the most effective actions that could be taken to address the climate crisis, and from both a perspective of feasibility, cost effectiveness, having the biggest impact. So of all of these project ideas that the program committees generated, what are the top 3, 5, 10 most impactful actions that could be taken? So that was one request that they made of staff, and they were very interested in us continuing to work with the program committees. I think the board really values, I know they really value the inputs that folks have provided so far through those program committees, and of course, all the public comments and other feedback that we get through our various channels. But they were interested in us reconvening those program committees to continue looking at the lists and doing some work on them. So what we're planning to do on the staff level is take the next couple of months and really think through how, what is the best way to provide our board that additional information about impact of actions. So we're going to be doing some work on that. And then we'd like to look at reconvening the program committees in the fall, probably late September timeframe. So we're going to do some work on our, kind of internal staff, looking at these projects and figuring out how can we best evaluate them, bring an update back to our board at its September meeting. And then based on the input that we receive at that point, we'll, determine it. What basically our question is, when we bring the program committees back together, what is the request that we're making of them? Because we really want to be mindful of everyone's time and, use the inputs as wisely as we can. So we want to take a little bit of time just to figure out the best way to do that. And one of the things in terms of that quantification that we'd like to take a look at is, we know several jurisdictions are in the process or have completed updates to their general plans. They've done work around climate planning. Healdsburg has a great effort underway to develop its own climate mobilization strategy. They've been working with a consultant and have some quantification and information. So we want to really take a look at all of that work that's been done and use that to help inform this feedback to our board. So that's what we'll be doing over the next couple of months. And then, as I said, reconvening the program committee sometime probably later in September. And then I know that there'll be, our board members are probably thinking about citizen-led measures and what might that look like, and kind of understanding the landscape there. But I think at this point, we're not going to be moving forward to develop an expenditure plan for a 2024 measure as originally envisioned. That could change based on what our board determines over the next couple of months, but that's kind of where things stand at this point. So any additional questions or input for us in terms of what we should be thinking about?
One thing for those ad hocs to perhaps look at is what is Pete's suggestion to prioritize cost savings that would have impacts. So either things that we're doing throughout the county budget or throughout other policy initiatives that are costing us money right now that could deliver some of the benefits that we were otherwise seeking from raising revenue. I think that's a really interesting problem to work through. And what we have to work with at this point, since we can't get money.
Yeah, sure.
And so what I understand the board's going to do, or the committees, is look at the different general plans updates for each municipality and see what their climate section is and put them all together. And
Yeah, that's something staff is going to take a look at. So because we know that there's been some analysis done by each of the jurisdictions, and we've got Santa Rosa and Petaluma, who are the two largest in the county. So really, and Roanoke Park, yeah, and so really trying to leverage the work that's been done. And so we want to do some of that homework ourselves and really figure out, what can we bring back to the program committees for additional input or feedback that would really be most valuable. And we don't quite know the answer to that yet, but we definitely want to spend some time there. I don't know, BC, did you have an additional comment or thought?
I think the only other thing I could add is I'm very, very interested in following, thinking through the model that Healdsburg has been following, their development of a climate mobilization strategy of a GHG inventory, forecast into the future, and then identification of kind of those high priority items and building that into a plan. I think that I want to follow some of the framework they're using and see if we can do that for take our project ideas that we've been circulating the last few months and bring them into that format.
Yeah.
I just wanted a quick comment. Since the presentation that we just heard deals directly with the public and public perceptions of all these matters that we talk about, I'm reminded of a paper that one of the authors of the Limits to Growth studies put out. Donella Meadows, Places to Intervene in a System. And I don't remember all of the 10 or 11, but she says the most effective, impactful place to intervene in the system is at the level of mindset, how people perceive or understand an issue. And that gets to what Ty was saying about we need a lot of education and messaging. And that's not the whole thing, but I think that's a whole area where we all have been a little bit negligent.
Yeah. Sorry, David had a comment and then.
Yeah, and I was just gonna ask Steve on your suggestion about looking for places where we keep digging a hole up. Do you have specific examples of that you've come across in the county budget? That's what we're talking about, right? This
Transportation.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, sure.
As I've been digging deep into non-automobile mobility, as I read through Petalum's projected budget, there are tens of millions of dollars being spent on road projects that encourage the wrong kind of transportation.
Yeah, we're about to spend $500 million on improving Highway 37, adding lanes. That'll be underwater in the not too distant future.
Kevin,
I hate to sound like a broken record, but there is $379 billion available through the Inflation Reduction Act for homeowners to go green, and it's not difficult to access that money. I would like to see as one of the big impacts that the RCPA could make is to get that information out there in an organized, effective way so that homeowners can realize there's money in it that I can access quickly to get an induction stove or a heat pump water heater or an HVAC system, even solar panels, electric cars. You can get $7,500.
taxes.
Yeah, I mean, people don't know this. That's why I think the RCPA would be a good place for it.
Great, thank you.
If I could really hold that thought, I think that comes back in on our next presentation as well,
Oh, okay.
to try to connect some dots.
So you can say it again.
Yeah, and actually, on that note,
Well, I was gonna have a comment on that, which maybe I'll repeat also on the thing, which is. I have a lot of folks who know about it, but can't find contractors to do the work, like that appears to be the weak link.
There's a lot of money available for contractors to get the information.
Right.
They're doing workshops all over the place for contractors,
Right.
so they're brought up to speed.
Okay, that would be cool, if that speed guys getting happened.
all right, any last comments or questions? And I didn't see.
I would just add as well, we are continuing a little bit of the direct outreach that we've done as part of this process. Working with some CBOs, just trying to get some direct opinions to from folks that are often not part of the climate conversation. So we are continuing to try to inform ourselves on the issue to see what works next.
And I think also to use it as an educational, to be sharing what we're doing.
Yeah.
How do we get strong allies such as the unions, realtors, chambers of commerce, the people that really do, lobby for stuff? How do they get them lobbying for the climate?
Good question.
And I would include the youth in that, especially with social media and things going viral, etc.
Yeah, Steve, we have been doing some outreach presentations to some of those groups, and we'll certainly continue doing that, but I'm sure there's a lot more that could be done, not just by RCPA, but overall, so. All right, I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this topic and I'll hand it back to you, Ross. I think maybe BC is next.
Yeah, exactly. So we will proceed to building electrification programs.
Sounds great.
Oh, sure, yeah, that's right.
I think I realized that. But,
That's where the gavel is.
Enjoyed our teamwork for Monday though. I don't mean, but. Okay,
It was good.
excellent. Thanks, Drew. Let me know when we're set. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. My name is BC Caps. I work here as the Climate Change Program Specialist with Tanya as part of the RCPA team. This is a presentation, a repeat presentation that I gave to our Board of Directors on Monday. So if anybody was at that meeting or participated in that meeting, this is going to be a review of some of the same material. I'm going to try to move through it a little bit quicker so that we can come back and save the time for some discussion at the end, because I think that's where our value is here today. So everything we were talking about so far as in relation to the revenue measure is obviously looking at opportunities to fund things across the board that have climate impacts. And so it includes, we've been looking at our program committees, been looking at the buildings, the built environment, been looking at transportation systems, been looking at natural land and water systems and resilient systems. This presentation really focuses in on that building energy and building electrification side makes up a huge part of our work here and is a huge part of the GHG picture. So let's see. There we go. Yeah, I think I got it. It took that one. Perfect. So very briefly, I wanted to go through this kind of three key kind of sections of this I wanted to talk about. First is a little bit of background information on policy context, things we've been working on here, both locally and kind of at the state level. Then talk about some existing programs, some programs that already exist that I think are some of the ones that were referenced as far as needing to get that information better, get that information out to homeowners. And then I wanted to wrap up by talking about some of our future efforts and kind of the new offerings that we have in mind. And I think there's some opportunities there that would be great to get some input on. So as a way of kind of background, every 2 years, or approximately every 2 years, the RCPA conducts a greenhouse gas inventory. This chart here, really the key thing here is to look at the circle at the middle. Basically, our last inventory, which looked at 2020 emissions, showed that we had reduced emissions by 23% below our 1990 levels. That didn't meet our goal of 25% below 1990, but we were pretty darn close. And so that was kind of a huge feather in our cap collectively as we kind of hit that mark. And now if you look at the 2030 and yes.
How does that accomplishment compare with the rest of the state and with the county?
So that is a good question. I don't have an answer for off the top of my head, but that's,
We should all know that.
yeah. And I'll say, I do have those numbers in my presentation on this material from our board several months ago, so I can easily grab those. So the key thing I wanted to point out here was that the star at the bottom shows a dramatic reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions over the upcoming years that we have set a goal to meet. And so obviously we are working and looking at that, how to meet that goal. These numbers here are kind of aggregate numbers that include buildings, transportation, waste, water, and agricultural emissions. So this picture is the big picture. And for the rest of this, I'm going to really focus in just on the buildings energy piece. And a lot of this is really centered around, from here on out, it's really centered around RCPA's work directly with the Bay Area Regional Energy Network, with Sonoma Clean Power, and with the county's Climate Action and Resiliency Division. So this graph here shows basically this is the buildings energy greenhouse gas emissions split between electricity in blue and natural gas in orange. And as you can see from 1990 over 2020, we're seeing quite a steep decline in the emissions from electricity. This isn't the amount of electricity we use, but the amount of emissions that are resultant. And that steep decline is really, I think, chiefly attributable to the creation of Sonoma Clean Power in 2012. And even though the line, because of the scales on this, it doesn't show as much, that blue line actually shows an 84% decrease since 1990. If I were to actually stretch that out over the 30-year period. And so that really shows that we've been able to make those reductions in the electricity sector because of a lot of the work of Sonoma Clean Power and other partners. And now one of the huge efforts that we have to make collectively is kind of looking in at those emissions from natural gas, from methane gas, that are kind of still part of, very much embedded as part of our built environment. Following out of the greenhouse gas inventory and the work we did there and the work in Climate Action 2020, RCPA developed a climate mobilization strategy. One of the key strategies was to focus on all electric buildings. And we had three kind of objectives, really looking at retrofit requirements for existing buildings, looking at requirements for new buildings to be constructed as all electric, and looking at the integration of kind of equity and social equity concerns into kind of embedding that into the work that we do at a deeper level. So talking about some current efforts that are underway and focusing in first on the new construction piece. There's been a lot of work done the last few years on building code amendments that help ratchet down, make the building requirements locally more stringent, specifically in relation to the use of natural gas equipment and other kind of electric equipment or that is required for new construction. There's three jurisdictions that have adopted a building code amendment that is linked to the actual building code cycle. That's the city of Healdsburg, city of Santa Rosa, and the county of Sonoma. There is then Petaluma also has an electric or has a natural gas ban, which was approved via a different mechanism. And so there are these multiple pathways to get towards all electric buildings. And the thing I wanted to point out was that the city of Berkeley has recently is caught up in a lawsuit that is before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that has direct implications to the city of Petaluma's ordinance, and it has potential impact or potential unknown impacts to the other ordinances. So that's just a situation right now that we're kind of sitting and watching. Both Katati and Windsor have been working on all of the ordinances as part of their building code. And as my understanding is kind of they have the language written, the council is supportive, but they're both holding because of the legal kind of ambiguity right now. So
Can I ask, I was of the impression, now, when you say building, I don't know if that includes residents. Homes,
yes.
That Santa Rosa did have a ban on new construction, is not able to lay the infrastructure for natural gas. Am I wrong on that?
So Santa Rosa does have, yes, Santa Rosa does have an all electric ordinance.
Yeah.
It was adopted as a direct
Reach code.
reach code tied to the building code. And the main difference, the city of Petaluma also has something that accomplishes very similar end results, but it kind of took a different pathway. So I think the key thing here is to get towards all electric construction, there's multiple pathways, and there's some legal ambiguity right now that is put the brakes on efforts. We thought we were going to have 2 more cities adopt all electric reach codes. Boom, boom. Those are now on.
And just to clarify, Santa Rosa, Healdsburg, and Sonoma counties building code related measure applies to all new residential construction of 3 stories or less. Petaluma's through the health and safety code applies effectively to all new construction.
It's a very good point. There's those nuances of like what it applies to, right, that I haven't brought in here as well. So, okay. So That's really for new construction. That's where a lot of our effort has been. On the existing building side, this is where there's a huge amount of effort that's needed, and a lot of our upcoming work is going to be centered around this. One key thing I wanted to point out is these rule change that's recently been proposed and adopted by the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. That covers the bottom southern 2/3 of our county, and that's really going to place restrictions, future restrictions on the sale and installation of natural gas water heaters and natural gas furnace systems. So that has been adopted by the Air Quality District. Those restrictions come in a couple of years, but that's something that we're watching very closely. And I think one thing that's interesting is the REACH codes that I was talking about in the last slide are really looking to regulate the fuel source coming into the building. The Air Quality Management District has authority to regulate emissions coming out of the building. So it's just when we think about kind of the legal nuances of how we can patch this together and what's going to legally fly, it's interesting to see how this mosaic is coming together.
Do those restrictions on like water heaters and furnaces, are they just no natural gas, or do they have any efficiency requirements or anything additional on that?
The restrictions are basically having to have zero nitrous oxide emissions. And at this point, only electric equipment meets that requirement. There is the possibility for there to be high efficiency non-electric equipment that could meet that requirement in the future.
Well, I was just thinking it could be an electric water heater, but not a heat pump based water heater or something like that. It could be a very inexpensive water heater.
Yes,
Okay.
I believe the restrictions allow for a wider range of less efficient equipment.
Right, just not emitting.
Yeah.
Just one quick comment. These are well-intentioned efforts, but the reality is that it's a very small percentage of water heater replacements and furnace changeouts that are done with permits.
So,
But will they start, I mean, will Home Depot still carry, who knows?
If there's a demand, perhaps.
I'm not going to take the time to walk through these next two slides. These are graphics that I borrowed from the county's Climate Action and Resiliency Division. They have this very nice home resilience guide, kind of walks through homeowners about what equipment in your home and your buildings could be upgraded, and then walks through basically the kind of the path to electrification. These are a lot of the steps that I think we can do a better job of bringing out as how-to guides, the handouts for a resident. Oh, so you want to upgrade something, here's your handout, follow these 5 steps. So I don't want to necessarily walk through this right now, but I think that presenting pathways like this and checklists like this to homeowners is something that's kind of in our we're thinking about how to increase in the future. The topic of funding, incentives, rebates, and financing from multiple sources came up earlier. Here's a long list of potential funding sources for current rebates and incentives. All of these are currently active. I have a whole separate slideshow that goes in really in detail on a lot of this material. So if anybody is interested in that additional deeper dive into what are the specifics of the Healdsburg electric utility program, or the specifics on Go Green financing, I kind of have that information. Not presenting it here today, but these are kind of the host of financial kind of programs that we're following. You can see the federal, the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits kind of there on the bottom, kind of as something that we need to think about how to integrate in as far as our messaging at this point. So.
Can you just point out that Sonoma Clean Power has reduced their payment from $3,000 to $1,000 for HVAC systems? I just put one in and just made it under and the same is true of Bayren. They are changing all their guide rules about how to get that $1,000.
Right. So some of those values have been reduced in the short term, and I think as I understand it, they're basically trying to stretch budgets into the next fiscal, kind of when there's the new funds to refresh the program. I think it also it shows increased demand in the programs as well. So it's a kind of a give and take. I think it's a mixed message. So, but yeah, unfortunately for anybody wanting to complete a project in the short term, those values are going to be reduced. So I wanted to wrap up here and talk about these last two slides are going to talk briefly about things that we here in our office, our CPA staff is either we're going to be working on directly or very much kind of leading. We hold a contract with the Bay Area Regional Energy Network as the Sonoma County lead for work here locally. And then we work very closely with the Climate Action and Resiliency Division to kind of implement those programs. So the BayREN program has just had their 2024 budget adopted by the California Public Utilities Commission. So these programs are slated to come in online starting in January. And some of these things were starting to creep in a little bit earlier. But what we're really looking for is RCPA is going to be hiring an additional staff member who's going to work both to support the Water Upgrade Save program, as well as to support, kind of provide additional support for local jurisdictions to do outreach efforts on a number of these programs, specifically tailored towards trying to get the word out on what BayREN resources are available for both residents, business owners, and local government, because I think there are programs, there's even local government programs we're really trying to get into the hands of the jurisdictions. Another thing, there's going to be development of an electrification assessment checklist, which we use for homeowners to basically do a survey of your house, which will help point out where your needs are. We'll do some additional marketing to multifamily buildings and multifamily kind of building owners. We're going to expand our reach code support and in-person consultation services for jurisdictions. And that at this point, we're on the reach code work, because of the legal ambiguity, we're looking at what things we would want to do in the future for potentially even thinking about the next 3-year code cycle, if we need to kind of wait. There's going to be a new commercial refrigeration replacement program. We're going to be looking to get a deeper partnership with PG&E's local government partnership program. And there's also going to be funds in the next BayREN budget to work on local workforce and job link, kind of looking at that workforce training aspect and how to bring up individuals into the kind of the new class of contractors. And then the last slide here that we're also going to be working on, and specifically in relation to the existing buildings, is looking to leverage, we have desire to develop an existing buildings electrification strategy. That's really going to build upon the work that's been done by the city of Berkeley, Contra Costa, and San Francisco. And it's really going to look at it's potentially trying to develop a roadmap based upon different kind of consumer types or customer types around Sonoma County on all of the steps that are needed and how we can upgrade all of our buildings across the county at scale. And I think that's the key issue. Doing 1 or 2 buildings, doing 1 water heater here or 1 furnace there, it's work, but we're kind of creeping along. But the huge part of this effort is going to be, how do we do that at scale? And what's needed? What resources do we have that we can leverage that we already have handy, and what do we need to expand? BayREN is doing some work on kind of building analysis. We are going to be looking at kind of state legislative issues, kind of what's the state kind of framework that we're working under. And then the last thing here, really wanting to integrate social equity considerations from the ground up, because there's this huge issue that basically we could end up that there's a strong possibility that once the upgrades are completed, that we would have households with more money will be able to afford doing upgrades. Households without will potentially not be able to afford, and will just end up exacerbating kind of the existing split between haves and have-nots. So we really want to give some deep thought to how we really right-size that and make it so that everyone kind of is able to upgrade their homes
So
together.
BC, the Inflation Reduction Act, 40% of that money is earmarked for low income communities, so. A lot of that $379 billion will be going directly to those lower income neighborhoods.
With that, that was my last slide, and I know we don't have that much time because I want to make sure we have time for kind of the rest of our agenda, but certainly have time for questions, feedback, comments.
What, if anything, can be or has been done to work with our utility companies to make sure that the electrification process, especially for new construction, is going to happen as we grow? It seems in the news and whatnot that there are extensive delays often coming from utilities.
That is a topic that I think RCPA has very limited control over. We are certainly in consultation with Sonoma Clean Power as to what role they can play, but I think even Sonoma Clean Power, as our CCA who works directly with the utility, feels at a loss for what to do. Sonoma Clean Power and others are really focusing on the all electric or the 100% renewable energy that flows through the pipes, but not being able to flows through the wires, but not able to really influence that issue. I think that's a state legislative issue. It's a CPUC issue, and I do know that there are other efforts above and beyond what we can do here that are looking at that.
There are some things we can do on that at the local level that I learned about at this recent climate energy conference hosted here in Santa Rosa. Local government officials collected together. Apparently, in the residential sector, there's two ways to design an electric panel. There's two calculation methods in the National Electric Code. And the code was changed several years ago to allow this second method, which effectively allows us to do a home electrification project without increasing the panel size for an existing home. You can put in place a circuit share technology. I'm doing a retrofit right now that involves this, where like the EV charger and the oven are on the same circuit. They can never both operate at the same time. So my electric panel does not need to be upsized, which would require a new line from PG&E to do so. So making sure our local jurisdictions are aware of this and the code officials are comfortable working with this methodology could save that potential bottleneck as we start to scale these programs.
That doesn't affect the new construction issue, though.
It does affect new construction. You're right. It doesn't affect brand new
service. Do you know what that second method of calculating total load is? What that's called?
I was looking through my notes for the code section, and I can find that if you want me to follow up with it. I don't seem to have it. If I find it in the next few minutes, I'll blurt it out, but otherwise I'll have it someplace.
I don't, but also to what you were saying before, that this kind of information needs to get out to electrical contractors.
Yes, exactly.
I see that Ty's hand is up. I want to make sure we include you here.
So my question is about your last slide. You said that there was going to be an additional position with RCPA for enhanced coordination for the local jurisdictions. Will that just be the city staff that can come to you? Or in Healdsburg, we've coined this phrase of a clean energy concierge, who is someone that you can call. And I know as a consumer, my friend Pete Gang helped me through some of the rebuild of my all electric house, because at the time, I went to Healdsburg Electric, then go to Bayren, do this, do that. If there's some central place that a consumer can go to get that information, it's really helpful.
I want to make sure, and Tanya might step in here in a second. My understanding is this role, the new role, is going to be really providing, it's about working with the jurisdictional staff to think about how Baybrand and other services can be better deployed throughout the whole jurisdiction. Not an individual who's going to be there to answer individual homeowner calls. That whole concierge or kind of advisor service, I think is a fantastic idea that we need to explore separately, but that's not necessarily, this is going to be more of a staff level position that's really going to be looking at how do we expand Baybrand services and other services throughout the county.
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
How often do we put out press releases that cover the progress that's being made? And can we set it up so we get some op-eds to deal with this issue? I think, you know, the general public just goes about their business, but occasionally they read the newspaper and we need to sort of show what we're up to.
I think it's a great suggestion. Thank you. Seeing no other hands and knowing that we have some other items, I think I'd like to thank everybody and
Thank you.
no, I'm gonna pass it back to you, Russ.
Sure, thank you, PC. I will say, I know that recently I did forward your presentation from the board meeting to.
Oh, Mary Callahan?
Yeah, so they are aware of some of this, but they will hopefully get some coverage, but this is the press release.
I'd like to make one other request to DC. You said you had a different the other presentation on all of the rebates and programs. Could you just forward that to the whole group?
I will make sure that I will make sure that both presentations go out to this body. Yeah, as followed from this meeting.
I think that'd be great.
Yeah.
I think that's something we can
Good.
help
Good,
share around.
good suggestion. Thank you.
So next on the agenda, report out from members by jurisdiction. Basically things that are relevant to the group that have been going on, and I believe going down the list, we will start with Healdsburg. Any updates from Healdsburg, Terry?
Yeah, and Stephanie sends her regards. She wasn't able to make it today, but as you said earlier, we're very gratified by what is happening at the level of city staff, and we know that RCPA has been assisting, but it's been remarkable how Healdsburg has made a significant change in terms of how they're looking at the climate mobilization strategy. So at this point, we're having the task of sitting down with city staff and saying, what are the things on this enormous document that's been created? What are the things, the specific measures and actions that city staff can do? Or there are potential grant fundings, like we've been talking about the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and what can we as residents do? And so we've got some really good energy going towards some of the things that some of the other jurisdictions have been doing. We've met with some of the people in Petaluma about their relief program. And so tree planting or carbon sequestration is something that residents can get involved with. So that's really helpful. The last comment I would make, because I know there's others that need to talk about what's going on, is that when my 2-year term came up for, replacement, and Ariel asked me, and I was trying really hard to try to find someone to take my place on this body. And the problem, and I'm going to just throw this out there, I know we've talked about this in the past, is that they can't meet at this time of day. I found some younger people, but they were unable to meet at 11:30 on a Friday. So I would suggest that as we go forward, we think about that. I would also suggest, and I know it's come up in the past, we've got now a climate club at Healdsburg High School, and we've got some young people that are very, very engaged and working on some anti-idling and some things that are going to happen with plastic reduction and composting at the high school. Is there a way we could consider some youth representatives on this body? Because I think working with young people and helping them to feel like they're part of these efforts is really critical. So I'll stop there. And again, thanks to some of you on this board for being so great about helping in Healdsburg, because it's made a big difference. So.
Thank you, Tyra.
Can I ask one question?
Sorry.
Sorry, I'm just curious about the time for the meeting time. Do you have any, based on what you've been hearing from folks? Is there a different time or day of the week that you think would work better?
Well, you know, we've tried to face this in terms of our own community organizations, and we've been told repeatedly, and I know it's not convenient, but we've been told repeatedly by people who have small children and people who work that if we hold meetings before 5:30, 6 o'clock, they're not able to come. And Stephanie's faced with some of that right now. I promised to be in the room at the next meeting in October, but childcare issues and picking up kids from school, you know, all of this is impacting. So, you know, we even though for me it's fine because I'm retired, and for a lot of us in this room it's fine. But yeah, the night meetings are better, and I think we saw that with the Climate Protection Initiative. When people were meeting about that, they were meeting at night. So it's not convenient, but if it is a climate action advisory committee and you want to get a broader cross section, because I worked really hard to get somebody younger and looks a little different than me. So, and I was just not successful. So I guess you're stuck with me for another couple of years unless I find someone.
Thank you.
Updates from Petaluma?
I'll defer to Pete for some of the major issues. The only thing that I have to report on is I'm a volunteer with 350 Petaluma, and our food share to table program is beginning this Saturday. It meets once a month at our library, and we have engaged home gardeners, and we have some community gardens and Bounty to bring their excess food to the library the third Saturday of every month. Because I know that the stamp program has been limited, and last year we helped 75 families, so we hope to increase upon that. And anybody's welcome to drop anything off. No need is, you don't have to have proof of need, and you just take what you can use. So that's my report on that.
Okay, I will try to be brief. So informing my comment before about all the money that we're already spending to dig the hole deeper. I've been involved in two things that I just wanted to highlight. One is an American Institute of Architects Sustainable Design Assessment Team effort, an AIA SDAT effort that a group of us locals first organized in 2019. There was a break due to COVID. The AIA SDAT team came to Petaluma last August to help us think about the dual problems or issues of complete streets and 15-minute neighborhoods. So the team was really excited to work on these topics. It's the marriage of transportation and land use, which are related. So most recently, our local team put together a slide deck to summarize the SDAT team's final presentation, and we've been presenting to many of our commissions and committees. Planning, general plan advisory, tree, transit, parks and rec. And I can tell you that the recommendations in the final report have been very warmly, enthusiastically received. And on the transportation front, the SDAT team recommended that we reimagine all of our 4-lane arterials as being greenways with planting, stormwater infiltration, trees, wide multi-use pathways. And that network would connect with our existing network of creekside paths. Very compelling, but totally radical approaches. So anyway, there's that. The other thing is that our local group, Safe Streets Petaluma, brought to Petaluma a group of consultants who call themselves City Thread. And the city of Santa Rosa, Bikeable Santa Rosa, also brought these consultants to Santa Rosa. Petaluma and Santa Rosa were one of 9 cities around the country that recently benefited from City Thread's consulting services. What they do is help cities accelerate their non-automobile, the build out of their non-automobile mobility networks. So their bike paths and bike lanes. And they set up a gathering in Denver in the middle of June for representatives from each of the 9 cities, 1 community member and 1 city staff person, highlighting the necessity for the community and the city to work in close collaboration. And I was the community representative. It was a great gathering. Lots of specific recommendations. Also great to feel that we are together with Cincinnati and Cleveland and Indianapolis and Milwaukee and Syracuse, working toward accelerating the build out of our bike infrastructure. So we're nipping at the heels of our city to get all that done. That wasn't short.
Thank you, Pete. Any updates from Rotor Park?
Yes, thank you. Shirley had to leave, but she wanted me to mention that Roner Park has been working on the bike and pedestrian infrastructure updates. And as we all know, this is going to be a very vital part of moving forward. I have a long list, but to keep it really short, I think probably some of the biggest updates in Roner Park, things that people have been seeing, is going to be our creek projects that are coming up. We have the Copeland Creek Trail extension, adding the 1.4 miles from SSU to Crane Creek. And also the work that has been done in partnerships around our homelessness, the sustainability practices around our Roberts Lake encampment and task force that we are setting an example for and hoping other jurisdictions will follow.
Thank you. And then moving on to Santa Rosa.
Well, I'm happy to report that after a pretty long hiatus, the Climate Action Subcommittee is meeting again. They met on July 5th. And the staff presented to the council or to that Climate Action Subcommittee members that the infrastructure master plan that they've developed for electrifying the fleet in Santa Rosa. They have a roadmap for this. It does include charging stations, and they did secure some grant funding from the Metro Transportation Commission to evaluate the park public charging needs. Also, and this is a real, for me, glad thing to know that they have really pulled out the 2012 Climate Action Plan and 2013 Municipal Climate Action Plan. So one's urban and one's municipal. And they have gone over that with a fine-tooth comb and presented the report on what is the status of the 2012 plan and the municipal plan. And that, to me, is real progress. I think for them to be taking this serious a look at what they decided to implement back in 2012, it's great to see now finally being worked up. So that's pretty much my report.
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Let's see, and then moving to Sonoma.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Tom report on specifics of Sonoma to the extent that there are things to report. I'll report, I've been working with the Sea Ranch community and have a few things to report on that. I think I've talked in the past about wanting to move that community more, towards carbon reduction, and we've had a recent success, and that the security, the homeowners association has purchased 2 electric vehicles, or I'm sorry, leased 2 electric vehicles for their security fleet, and they've taken delivery. They're not quite in service yet, but we've moved a step closer to some reductions there. So, and we're also continuing to work on ways to reduce their propane usage, mainly by looking at use of heat pumps for pool heating instead of propane. So I think we'll get progress on that in the next fiscal year.
And then for the city of Sonoma, I'm on the Climate Action Commission there. We meet, I believe, bi-monthly, and we have recently hired a new community development director, which is merging our planning and our building departments together under one position. So I met with that person. She was meeting with all of the different commissioners, I believe, under her purview. And we had, prior to her hiring, we the various different ad hoc committees of the Climate Action Commission had worked on budget recommendations. And so we presented those to the city before they made the budget investments decisions. We're getting support from city staff in coordinating the efforts of the various different bodies. So included in some of our recommendations are an electrification plan for our fleets. And we recommended a moratorium on the purchase of new vehicles until that electrification strategy is worked out. We also recommended adoption of the new gas station or gas station expansion ban that's been popular around the county. Let's see, there's a number of other items of big investments in city buildings to make them more energy efficient, and to look at solar power where we don't already have solar power on those buildings, phasing out natural gas equipment in those city-owned buildings. Let's see where. And in electrification, transportation, we also have a lot of interest in the commission, my co-commissioner on transportation, in possibility of some kind of trolley to support tourism, people moving in Sonoma. So we're going to be looking at possibility of an electric shuttle. There seems to be some support for that idea from the tourism folks as well. So and climate smart tourism is also on our agenda. Especially looking at the recent experience in Lake Tahoe with the over tourism that they're experiencing, a lot of trash and whatnot building up there. We want to be sure we stay ahead of that curve here in Sonoma County. So let's see what else. I had some questions about status of our tree protection ordinance work, where we are in the inventory update process, and our Acadia's contract, which recently completed, and then the new contract for sequestration. This county's sequestration at the county level, but we won't have time to talk about those things today, but they're just things that are on my mind for us to keep track of. And then finally, I believe Dana Touré is coordinating a countywide bike ped master plan update. The city of Sonoma is very much looking forward to piggybacking on that effort with a number of other jurisdictions. And so not sure how to interface with that group most effectively. So I'm looking for answers to all those questions. Thank you for your consideration of all of that.
Any updates from Windsor?
Yeah, I've been gone for the last 5 weeks traveling, so I haven't got the most up to date, but I know that there's a continuing conversation in the town about the EV fleet and EV charging that has been robust and challenging, and I don't believe that has completed yet. There's multiple, investigations going on with GHG inventories, updating sections of the general plan, et cetera. There's more work happening too on the microgrid development and deployment in town of Windsor. I just feel like I should put an asterisk on that my father-in-law is a major pusher of that, so I think that's good. And also, I don't know why I feel obligated to mention that, but and then probably most relevant to this weekend, work has been done. I don't know how far this has proceeded to identify community resilience centers, places where during high heat moments, people can come together and cool off. So there's quite a bit happening. We do not have a second person. I think I mentioned this in the last meeting, but we lost Michelle Gervais, and we do not have a replacement yet. So we're looking for another person to join the town of Windsor representation on the CAAC. And I will say one super cool thing about this last trip that I just did, we were in Portland and also in Victoria on Vancouver Island in British Columbia, and the bike transportation infrastructure there. We all know Portland, I knew that, but Victoria's got the best bike infrastructure that I have ever seen. Like literally the interchanges at large intersections where protected bike lanes exist, and even at the turning. So large numbers of pedestrians, bikes, and cars all coming together in the literal concrete infrastructure to keep that as functional and safe as possible. Very, very nicely done. They have obviously repurposed rail lines. That's one of the major things that helps lead people into town. And then there's like known neighborhood streets that are also funneling to that. And then the most intense part of in town has that really built out. And I think that's remarkable, partly because I'd never seen anything that good before. And also when you consider like how often are people really riding bikes on Vancouver Island, it's we were there during a 85-degree day, no precipitation, but I understand that's a rare event, but there was a lot of bikes. So
Becoming more common.
yes, they're gonna get more of those days. Yes, everyone said that too. That's into my report.
Excellent.
Nice.
Any other jurisdiction announcements? Yes, you got everyone. RCPA update on activities. Did we have a brief announcement? Or was
Maybe just a
that pretty
quick
covered?
update. Yeah, actually, so Tom, you asked about inventory plans. So one of the things that we was looking at is, planning for our next working on a schedule for that. And, we're looking at potentially doing 2 years worth of inventory, like 21, 22. So we are starting to look at plans for that. We'll give all of an update when we have that kind of solidified in terms of the timing. BC is also looking at with our data analyst here on staff, the idea of a climate dashboard or an RCPA dashboard so that we could, share climate metrics more easily and completely. And maybe there are other indicators that we want to track and share: electricity usage, EMT, so starting to think about indicators and how best to display those. So it would probably be a good topic for our next meeting with this group. I'm going to give you something to give us feedback on. We are also tracking on the topic of funding. We're paying attention to state legislation. There is interest from the governor in a climate bond. And so there's two bills that are working their way through the Senate and Assembly related to some type of climate bond. So we're keeping an eye on that. Let me see if there's anything else.
Do you know what the funding for that would go to?
It's, it's like $15 billion, and the titles of the bill, I don't know the details of them, but they cover everything from drinking water, wildfire prevention, drought, flood, clean energy, workforce development. So it's,
Comprehensive.
kind of a big package of all sorts of things. Yeah, so I think those are the highlights from RCPA. And then just real quickly, Tom, on the county. So yes, the county has wrapped up its own municipal inventory. I don't know if that's been published yet. I don't think so. So, but we should expect to see that soon. And then, yes, there is work underway on the sequestration study. The consultants are on board. doing kind of the, surveying, inventorying, and doing some initial mapping. So that work is underway, and I don't know kind of when the next milestone will be that there'll be something released for the public to review, but it's definitely in progress with, I think, an expectation of completion by the end of this calendar year.
Okay, I'm just wondering how we interface with that different entity, if, like at the jurisdiction level. Should I be calling like Anna Yip directly or Barbara Lee directly, or is there some other public process that's?
Well, there should be a public, when they're, and I can. follow up
It's,
and
I think
find
it's
out. I
a,
mean,
it's
there'll
a
be
question of this coordination, like having that, those are pretty important initiatives. It might be nice to have them come to this
public- Yeah,
meeting.
certainly.
They might find that useful as well. Just a suggestion, but
Yeah, but I was thinking the same thing, the cash line, that they come with an update on what's happening. there, so.
great, thank you.
Do you see anything else from RCPA that you want to?
No, I was just thinking about this sequestration study. So I've spent part of 2
Oh, yeah.
days this week at Charette, where
Okay.
they're with the consultant team who's trying to develop this. The topic of coordination with jurisdictions did come up in those conversations, but didn't go very far because the study is really looking at the large scale county lens, and it's looking at it by habitat type, not necessarily by how would we implement a project in this jurisdiction. Just to wrap up, I think that there's 2 pieces they're working on that are linked but different. One is the quantitative study, which will be the study of current carbon stocks and sequestration potential, more of a numeric study based upon habitat type. And then there'll also be an implementation plan, which will be a bit more like, and then what are the best practices to implement in these areas? So it's the first is the count and guidance on where to do projects, and then the second piece is the documentation on how to implement those. So,
Can I ask BC, when you talk about sequestration, are you talking about regenerative agriculture mainly, or are you talking about carbon capture and sequestration?
there's been no talk about carbon capture, like a mechanical. Everything that was at this workshop and everything the county is talking about is all based around natural-based solutions, nature-based solutions. A lot of talk about grassland management, rangeland management, ag, and then also just forest management and just thinking about forests. So,
Yeah, at least 70% is in forest.
yeah. So, but yes, those topics were very much on the topic.
BC, who's the consultant who's?
So it's being led through the county at the Climate Action and Resiliency Division, and the consultant is Rincon Consultants.
Excellent.
I had one more
Yeah,
question,
go ahead.
actually. I just wanted to double check that. BC is gonna send the link to the 2 presentations, and then you're gonna send us the data, a link to the data
Yeah,
on
for
the
the
poll and stuff. Okay, thank you.
In reality, what we will probably, you'll probably get the email from Drew. That'll have it all included, right?
I didn't want to shortchange Drew, sorry about that.
He runs out of time, and he's out next week, so I'll send it.
Okay.
That's the big thing. No.
In terms of announcements, I did have one for the committee, just in the interest of achieving a quorum consistently. Something that we've done with other committees, Citizens Advisory Committee for SCTA, is kind of define vacancy a little bit different, and so I will be bringing some information on that to the next meeting, just because I know that for some jurisdictions, we're having trouble filling the spots, and we just don't want those to count against a quorum if it's consistently, folks are not consistently there. So we've done that successfully with CAC for SCTA, and I think that's helped to keep quorum. So we're kind of looking, they're different charters, but we're trying to see if we can do that without actually amending the admin code, which would make it happen much faster. So I'll bring some information on that.
Yeah, so a comment from me is that the Rewiring America, are people familiar with that? They're holding a webinar on July 24th at 11 a.m. our time, all dealing with what do people need to know to advocate effectively for electrifying everything. So they're giving a webinar on that. And then I have a question. Anybody know what AECOM is? AECOM? What is it?
Or consulting, design, engineering, architecture, engineering, and
Okay, because they did a study for Santa Rosa on microgrids and solar panels. And, you know, the possibility, how do I get my hands on that? Before?
For the city of Santa Rosa
Yeah,
recently.
that was reported in the July 5th Climate Action Subcommittee meeting.
Haven't seen or heard about that. That's news to me.
You know, contact the staff.
Yeah.
I will also look into that.
Yeah.
So I'd
I
be
think it
interested
might
in
have
that.
been presented at one
Yeah.
of the meetings, so it might be this one.
Can I ask a question about what you said a moment ago about quorum? Other than not being able to approve minutes, what are the downsides or costs of not having a quorum?
Well, that's taking any action.
What action are we taking?
Usually it's just the minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can't do
But
that.
but yeah, as a Brown Act committee, I think, you know, we certainly want to achieve quorum, just for legitimacy.
And
purposes.
we could have, for example, if the revenue measure were going to be put on, you know,
Right,
something
that's
we
a good
wanted the
point.
county to vote for, we might have been asked at this body to endorse some language or to
Yeah.
input on that. We could have had an action around that, for example.
Exactly, yeah, and I certainly understand that, you know, coming back in person has made that more difficult, and certainly if, you know, in the case of if you're able to, you know, log in via Zoom, and if there is a qualifying emergency, there's AB 2449 allows for 2 just cause and 2 emergencies, so let us know in advance. And, you know, we can make that work. We were following some legislation about that would potentially make things easier. Unfortunately, that is not, there's not going to be any changes that we see in the foreseeable future. Any other last announcements, anything before we adjourn today? Then we are adjourned. Thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time today.
Casey, are you gonna do the gavel for?
Yeah.
Yeah, why not?
No, you gotta use more.
Yeah, that was very different.